Hey everybody, Kevin Anderson here with Healthmark, a getting a company. I wanted to welcome you all back to the channel, and I hope you enjoy this latest quick tips for the sterile processing department video. This one having to do with bone cement on surgical instruments. Now, if you've worked in sterile processing for any number of years or any length of time, you've probably run into the issue of retained bone cement, something that uh, looks like this, right? Sometimes you might hear from the operating room that they had to reset up their sterile field, or they have a contaminated tray and it's retained bone cement. This one happened to come to me while I was an SPD manager, and the staff were asking me, how are they supposed to clean it? Well, unfortunately, as you can see, that wasn't a very cleanable instrument. And so this instance was a very costly one for us, as we had no other choice other than to replace the instrument. So these kinds of occurrences, bone cement, retained bone cement, can be expensive. They can cause delays, even cancellations in the operating room. So it's a really important problem that we try to address in sterile processing. So how are we supposed to do that when we have all of these instruments and more, right? We have power equipment, we have our regular instrument trays, all of that stuff, in addition to all of these total joint trays. So how are we supposed to do that with all those instruments coming through, right? That's a great question. And I'm going to try and help address that question as we go through this video, and try to equip you guys with some tactics on how to improve this problem and hopefully even eliminate it altogether. Now, one of the things that's going to be really important if you're going to solve this problem is that you're going to need to know the common culprits, as I would refer to them, and that would be those few instruments that are typically used during the cementing process that also are at higher risk of having retained bone cement. Remember, all those instruments I just showed you, there's only going to be a handful of them or so that are used during the cementing process. And this is a great example right here of an impactor head. This one's always used during the cementing process to put the prosthesis into place. And as you can maybe see there, and I put this little ring around it, there is a little bit of residual bone cement there on that impactor head. So this would be very problematic, either for an OR setting up their sterile field, or for sterile processing to try and remove it. Another variation on the same thing, this is another impactor head. Again, you're going to see multiple variations of these similar items based on the manufacturers that you have in your facility. But this is another variation. And as you can see here, there's like this little floating piece here that acts kind of like an elevator there. That I have seen has had some bone cement in it in the past. So that is something to be mindful of when you're inspecting for retained bone cement. Another one is the impactor handle itself. Again, this is one manufacturer. You're going to see multiple variations of this type of instrument, but they're all potential instruments to have retained bone cement on them. But in this picture, I kind of blow up the end. This is the part that I commonly saw retained bone cement on. It's that little part that sticks out that holds on to the impactor head. And I circled the little bit of residual bone cement there for you to make it easier to see. But you could maybe see how in real world you could easily sort of miss that if you were just kind of going through the instruments. You know, you have your visor on or your eye protection on and PPE and all of that stuff, and maybe the lighting's not so great. It would be pretty easy to overlook something like that. So that's why it's really important to know your common culprits. What about tonsil stats? Now, in my facility, we use tonsil stats or TNA, forceps, whatever you call them at your facility. We use them a lot for the cement removal process. And I don't know if you can see it there, but if I blow it up, maybe you can. There's a little speck of retained bone cement there. And this one's on the ring handle. Sometimes it's on the ring handle. It could also be in the serrations at the distal end where the jaws are. That's a very common place to find retained bone cement as well. So be mindful of that. Another one is the freer elevator. This one can have retained bone cement at either end. It can also, I've seen it sometimes where the bone cement got pressed into the handle of the freer elevator. So you're going to have to really inspect the entire instrument here. But fortunately, it's a pretty simple instrument and hopefully easier to find if you know where to look, right? And another one that we used in our facility were curettes. This may be one that they use at your facility. I don't know. But again, just get an idea of what those common culprits are. And how are you going to do that? Well, we're going to get to those solutions now. And hopefully you'll start to get the idea of how you could actually make this work and improve this problem at your facility. So number one is you got to know the recommendations. One is industry standards, guidelines, all of that. The other is the IFU. And this is where the folks in the OR may need to be educated on that. The IFUs of the cement, as well as the guidelines like AORN guidelines, AST is another one. They're all going to recommend to remove any bone cement right there at the point of use, as in section 6.1 of AORN, guidelines for perioperative practice. It is in there. So one thing that's really important is that anybody in your OR that works in there in a scrubbing capacity, that they are aware that the IFU, both the IFUs and industry standards and guidelines recommend that this stuff be removed at the point of use. Now, that being said, even if they are aware, even if they're great at their job at removing all of this stuff at the point of use, there is a chance that this stuff could still get through and make it to sterile processing. And so we need to know, how are we going to prevent this problem from rearing its ugly head? We could put processes into place that will set us up for success, hopefully, right? One of them I learned about from a customer. What they did was they isolated the instruments that were used in the cementing process. And how they did that was they just provided a container similar to what you see there on the screen. And that container, as items were being used for the cementing process, the OR scrubs would take those instruments and place them into this separate container. And that was the indicator both for the OR staff to go back over it and make sure the cement is removed, but also for sterile processing to really look those instruments over and try and make sure there's no retained bone cement on there. So that's a really important potential solution that you could easily implement in your facility. Another one is what do we do when we see the bone cement? Well, I know there is a chemistry out there by some manufacturer that is designed to help remove bone cement. However, it's always good to minimize chemistries in your department if you can. Also, I don't know if those chemistries are actually healthy for your instruments. So those are things that you would have to look into. But if you do see retained bone cement, you have to understand that your brushes, your automated washer, your sonic, none of those pieces of equipment are going to remove bone cement very effectively, if at all. So one way that you could possibly remove bone cement, because at this point it's already cured on the instrument, you're going to need something rigid like a osteotome or maybe a freer elevator or something like that, where you could actually chip the remaining bone cement off of the instrument. And of course, during this process, you're going to have to be very careful not to hurt yourself. That's why it's ideal that all of this stuff is removed at the point of use. But in case it gets to you, you do have to know how to remove it. So, in summary, how are we going to do this? Well, the first thing we're going to need to do is track and trend how often this actually happens. So, everybody needs to be on the same page in terms of reporting. When something goes wrong, everyone needs to know about it, and they need to be documenting it and making sure that, hey, if this happened today, how are we going to ensure that it's not going to happen tomorrow or next month or next year or what have you? The other thing is you got to know those common culprits. I shared with you the ones that were common in my facility, but it's really important that you start to know the common culprits in your facility, if they're any different, and educate according to that. And then consider implementing a process change like having instruments used during the cementing process be isolated in the OR and identified so that sterile processing personnel can easily find them and go over them with a fine-tooth comb and remove any remaining bone cement. And then lastly, make sure to educate all parties involved, whether it's OR staff, um, sterile processing staff. We have to get this information to everybody and then start auditing that point of use process to improve compliance with that bone cement removal in the OR. One of the things that you'll often hear from OR staff is that they're too pressured for time. There's no time. There's no time. And that's very common to hear, especially with total joints. However, there is always time during total joints, during the closing process. The counts are done. You can start removing bone cement, even if it is cured on there. They know how to do it as well. They can remove it. But that being said, it might just take some collaboration and some ongoing work with them to figure out the best time and place during their process to do that. So with that said, I hope you found this video helpful. We really appreciate you watching. If these videos are helpful for you, please consider liking and subscribing and obviously sharing the channel so that others may benefit as well. So thank you for watching and have a great day.